And
You good?
we are almost live. Okay. We are good.
Very good. Thank you. Welcome everybody to the Tuesday, May 16th, Planning and Parks Committee meeting. Start with Paul.
Okay. Councilmember Clark. Councilmember Ottenberg.
Here.
Councilmember Marshall. Councilmember Dodwell. Absent. Councilmember Galani.
Here.
Councilmember Flasher.
Here.
Councilmember Bartoni.
Here.
And we have a quorum. Oh, Councilmember Rambo. My apologies.
Chair, I just want to take the first an opportunity to, I've been on this chair position for 2 years now, and I this position I had said at the time that I wanted to do 2 years, and then I would pass the baton to somebody else to give them an opportunity. So that being said, I'll open it up for nominations for this year.
We would like to nominate Councilmember Mike Maloney to be the next chair of the committee.
Seconded by Councilmember Flasher. Any discussions or so can we take other nominations or do we vote on this one first?
Yes, prior to the meeting starting, the policy
Yeah.
relative to the selection of a committee chair. And so, yes, if you would just ask if there are any other nominations.
Any other nominations? Okay, seeing none, all those in favor of Mr. Vaughn, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Any abstentions? Correct.
I guess this is the new person.
Probably the abstention. Yes, I think that's. Yeah.
We have typically done it by voice vote, but is that?
Yeah. Okay. So before I turn the chair over to Mike, though, I do want to thank everybody for their support for the last couple of years. And everybody's been great to work with in the meetings. I think it's gone really well. And I think that's it. Very prepared, very professional. And it's been a special when it's working with staff, with Joe. And yeah, it's very professional. And Mike's going to learn real quick that he just stay out of it. So, which these should we do it by here?
Yes.
First, I'd like to hear the chairs.
Thank you, folks. Appreciate it. It's an honor and following John footsteps. It's a lot big shoes to fill. I know he's done a phenomenal job on it all the time I've been on Parks and Planning. So hopefully we can meet that standard and please be in submission at least this step on. So with that being said, I guess then we'll move to have a motion for vice chair. Do we need a motion for that?
Yes, we do.
We have a motion or nomination for vice chair.
Stop down back in.
Second, okay. So we have a second on the motion. All in favor of the motion for Mr. Councilmember Bartoni,
Mr. Chair, are there any other nominations?
is there any other nomination?
Thank you.
Seeing none, I guess all in favor for Councilmember Bartoni? Say aye. Aye. Any no's? Abstentions? All right, congratulations.
Congratulations to our leadership.
Errors. So sure. But the next on the agenda is approval of the 2023. Do we have a motion to approve the minutes? Councilmember Hunter, second by Councilmember Clark. All in favor?
I'll say, because I like.
Well, I was also saying.
Same here.
3 ayes and 4 abstained. Does that count as approval?
Actually, I believe it does for the purposes of minutes.
Okay. All right, and then next on the agenda, we have public input participation. Do we have anybody waiting? No?
No, we do not. Just Kristen from our Parks Department is. Probably. Thank you, though.
Nobody? Move on next to action items. And the planning matters, we have 3 items for consideration in the new business. And number 1, we have the USGS study of Fox Creek watershed update for Ward 2, 3, 4, 5, and 7. And Dr. Rudish.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair, members of the committee, the department wanted to provide you this update because we've kind of reached a milestone in the study process. We're not near the end of the study process that will go for approximately another 8 months. But at this stage, much of the field work has been completed. The data has been collected. And for the most part, the USGS and study team have entering that data into the models to develop conclusions and recommendations, et cetera. The reason it's on tonight's agenda is we did have the privilege last Wednesday at our watershed erosion task force meeting to have the study leader, Dr. Jessica Leroy, here to present what she would describe as probably some of the preliminary findings relative to the study. The presentation was about 45 minutes long, generated a lot of good conversation and questions. And for the most part, what we're seeing is that USGS is predicting that over the course of time, 2 basically milestones, 2050 and 2099, they anticipate that climate will have a major role in watersheds, in this case, Hawks Creek. They believe that storms intensities will increase, and for the most part, the number of those short duration intense storms are anticipated to be on the rise as well over that period. What does that mean for Hawks Creek and the other 8 watersheds in Wildwood? They anticipate that the erosive nature of the runoff is only going to become more problematic, and therefore steps need to be taken. The obvious question from the task force was, what are those steps? And they were not at yet that stage to provide those steps, but they will by the conclusion of the study. Some of the interesting facts that came out of it, probably the one that caught my attention the most, is that between February of 2022 and August of 2022, the triple meander there by Elegant Child lost about 13 feet of bank depth in that 6-month period, which was just astounding to me. That's just an incredible amount of material just washed away downstream. They also identified that there are some head scratchers relative to the data. The creek isn't acting as they would have typically thought based upon their hypotheses and their working parameters for the study. And so they were kind of challenged by that, but they promised to kind of straighten all that up and have some good answers for us. So from the perspective of the Watershed Erosion Task Force, they know that there's some challenges out there in the Hawks Creek watershed. They also understand that the task force and city council have been responsive to those challenges, and that working together along with the science community, there's a feeling that we will be able to at least protect our infrastructure and minimize impacts on private property as we go forward. That I'll conclude the presentation. I did provide you the slides from Dr. Leroy's discussion. It is also on our YouTube channel if you'd like to watch it in full. It's available there. She's kind enough to let us record. Thank you.
Thank you, Jared. Are you looking for any action from the committee?
No, sir, Mr. Chair, I'm not, just more of an update.
Please provide us the.
Have it by tomorrow morning.
Great, thank you.
Councilmember Bartholomew?
Thank you. Joe, so during the discussion, was there any talk about, two proposed huge developments in the town center area and like the effect that could have in the near future?
It's a very good question, and Mr. Farmer, who is one of the co-chairs of the Watershed Erosion Trust Force, asked that question point blank to Dr. Leroy. She somewhat skirted it, but did include that kind of about logic of saying that any impervious surface that is added into the watershed will have an impact on runoff, and the runoff will create additional erosion unless appropriate steps are taken. The response was, for the most part, that both between the Metropolitan St. Louis Sewer District and then the city of Wildwood, we do our best to mitigate that amount of runoff that comes off of impervious surfaces through bioretention, rain gardens, all of the steps that we all know and talk about almost, it seems like, with any project that comes forward these days. But I think her reading the kind of the facial expressions of Dr. Leroy, if there was even that's appropriate, I think her response was more of the less you have, the better, given your soil structure, bedrock composition, and just what they believe is kind of the smoking gun, the predictability of climate and the weather events that we're having.
Sure, I'll one word. So recently, there's a money pledge to us from the state with a cost sharing program. I don't know if that was discussed either, but if so, was there, did she have like, if that's going to be great, that's going to do a lot, or is that like that money's going to be a drop in the bucket, like you guys are going to?
Well, for the most part, that discussion occurred after Dr. Leroy had completed her presentation and then had gone outside to talk with Rick and Dan from our Department of Public Works. For the most part, the math seems to work out this way. If I could just take an extra minute or two, as some of the council members will recall, at the start of this fiscal year, we set aside $750,000 for watershed projects. That money was that seed money for those ARPA grants that the city had applied with Missouri Department of Natural Resources. The ARPA grants weren't awarded, but the money still is retained in the budget. If we go through all of the commitments we made to date with contracts with our consultant teams, et cetera, and those that we think we have out there with the Corps of Engineers for commits relative to some of the projects that we're trying to get shovel ready for future monies, we, meaning the task force, believe we have about $1 million, $500,000 out of our capital improvements and the $500,000 that the state has committed. And so we did have a discussion, and ultimately there was no consensus, but the thought was, we know we want to do basin retrofits. We have a consultant, Todd Wagner, working on that at this time. We've gotten great cooperation with the subdivisions where the basins are located, and they're very eager to assist the city if that's possible. We also talked about some of the less cost or least cost projects that we have on the list. Obviously, the Triple Meander and the Elegant Child Detention Basin have a price tag, at least in 2022, of $1.3 million. So we could start that project, but probably not finish it. So the thought is let's maybe look at some of those lesser cost projects and do more instead of just one. So I think we left the meeting with retrofits of old basins, Maybe 2 or 3 of the smaller projects on that list of 5 or 6 of the critical locations. And then one of the goals that's always been kind of front and center, but we haven't made much progress on, is the stormwater master plan for all 9 watersheds.
And why do the USGS is where it?
Well, I think it was just a relationship our assistant city engineer, Dan Ron, has with Paul Ridlin. Paul Ridlin is an employee of the USGS. He's in the Rolla office, but he also participates in the Merrimack River Recreation Association, which is kind of a group of not-for-profits, interested individuals and government agencies along the Merrimack River watershed. And so Dan and Paul knew each other, and I guess they had talked about this particular project at one of the MRRA meetings and kind of grew out of that. USGS obviously brings, at least the opinion of this department, probably a lot more expertise, experience, and resources to a project than, let's say, the state of Missouri. And not to politicalize it, but MDNR, if you talk to most of their employees, they're understaffed and have more things to do than we can keep up with. So I think the USGS probably was a good selection for us. The concern we all had at the start, though, Ms. Clark, was just a national or federal agency trying to come down to a very localized level. How's that work? And they seem to have accomplished it pretty well.
Yeah.
Thank you all.
Hey, you mentioned earlier that 500,000 what we have and the state matching 500,000 for $1 million. So maybe I misunderstood. At the end of the session last week, was that the 75-25 split, 75 state, 25 city?
Yes, so under that agreement or under that allocation, we would only have to match 20% of that 500,000. But since we already have money in the budget, the idea was, and ultimately this will all be your decision, but the task force has been working for 3+ years. This was our 34th meeting last Wednesday. Other than, let's say, some consultant contracts and being in a position, hopefully in the future, if grants do become available, having all of the groundwork laid, so to speak, we really haven't seen much progress in terms of addressing a problem or finding a solution.
I guess the question just is, if we were to raise $1 million, 10 million, if we needed 10 million, then the state would put in 7.5 and we put in 2.5. Is it a direct correlation across the board, or is it just up to a certain cash? Or
it is just the state appropriated $500,000, and we would only get that if we matched 20%. Sorry, I misunderstood.
No,
My apology. Thank you.
else? Good, okay, thank you. Next on the agenda, under new business, we've got MyGov permitting management software that affects all boards and Ms. Rutherford.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair and members of the committee, as you're aware, the Departments of Planning and Parks, as well as Public Works, have been working together to implement a web-based permitting software that will be integrated between the two departments in order to simplify and streamline workflows, improve efficiencies, manage records, improve transparency, and things like that. The department began implementation of MyGov in February of this year and went live in April also of this year, which is impressive if you've worked with other software companies. I can tell you that while trying to implement Acela in Maryland Heights, it was over a 2-year process. So managed. The implementation process required a lot of hours in a very short period of time in order to prep the data as well as train everyone in using it. However, many of these changes affected large groups of people, and the department is pleased to report these changes seem to be very well received, both by city team members as well as contractors. Since going live, the city's already received, as of today, 98 applications. It was 85 when we wrote the report. 20 work orders, 29 requests via the public portal, and currently has 39 collaborators already signed up and using the system. So although the bulk of the work regarding implementation has been completed, the departments will continue to integrate other existing processes into this automated system, such as, site plan approval and all of our other applications, as well as make changes as necessary. It's been a bit of a muddling through process, but it always is. But I think one of the greatest attributes of MyGov is that we can change it as we go. Like if we don't like the structure of a particular workflow, we can go in on the back end and change it. They train you on creating the applications, creating the processes that go with them, so we can continue to improve it without any additional fees from the software company. Therefore, the departments intend to integrate as many of these applications and processes available, as well as potentially import historical data if possible. So tonight, the department's not seeking any action, but rather just wanted to provide an update to the committee and thank you for your support in this project. And with that, that concludes the department's presentation. Unless anyone has any questions, Mr. Vunich or myself are here to answer them. Thank you.
Thank you for the presentation. Does anybody have any?
Here. We have like an overall plan. I'm looking for where this ends and what it can do for us. And I haven't yet been able to get a good handle on that. I know plenty of what it does, but I'm really aiming. And I did suggest in the prior meeting that we might be able to use it for some of the sort of right-of-way management problems that we're having with the internet. We don't know what the books are, and a lot of the data of the individual persons and those kinds of things. Is that in the direct? Is that a direct evolution of the MyGov as it's implemented? We need to buy more stuff. We need to put another system together. Do we have a plan for an architecture for data, for citywide data, such as this?
For one, it sounds like you're talking more like mapping as far as that's concerned. Just
Saying that you're well, part of permitting is knowing there's an issue today at Fox Creek that's Thursday concerning person's right of way and right to access for a particular parcel and those kinds of things, and that is directly in
sure. So another good thing about the software is that in addition to just permitting, we also have work orders. And so the Public Works Department and Parks Department can also take in work orders that can be submitted through our public portal as a service request from an outside person, or it can also be used internally to keep track of the different steps in which, like when it comes to fixing these things, as well as the charter issues. We also set up a service request in there so that people could, in addition to the form that we created, if they ended up in the MyGov portal to report a concern, they could also go through that and report any kind of charter related concerns, and we can continue to add to those as we see needed, and then they'll filter into the system, and the report of concern, the request manager module feeds into our other modules, so it can feed into code enforcement, or it can feed into the public works or planning work orders. Most of it's all on the back end, so it's city staff that actually sees it coming in and can keep track of these steps, check off the boxes as it goes through the process until the process is completed, and then it would eventually be archived. So on the front end, not all of that is accessible. It's more so just to keep track of things internally.
Don't we track it, but
Oh yeah.
that's a great verbal answer. I'm looking for a single page with a block diagram or flow chart or something, and make it. These are the modules, and then you could put, even if it's in Sharp, these are the modules we have. This is what we need next, and this is what we, it might only take an hour if and publication quality, this would be very handy.
Absolutely, absolutely. I will work on having that created to help simplify the process. It might also be worth putting it on the website so people can see how things go. I know. I'll get to it as soon as I'm done with charter. But yeah, so absolutely.
But I do give you kudos to that party because this will take a long way from that sort of, but Rob and, you know, gathering the data and it's safely, efficiently presented in one page would really help. I think I would call it a private charter page project. But yeah, the whole MyGov software, though, I think is a good step forward in the efficient way of planning and managing all. It reduces the variables that are involved. It reduces the human inputting and just it increases our productivity and reduces the cost, which they're really trying to do for taxpayers. Less go creep and cost overruns in the long run if we follow this process sign off. I have often referred to Six Sigma as a process, and I've recently come to know that that isn't a term that a lot of people understood, and I've used that quite often. I'll probably have to repeat myself in other meetings, but Six Sigma is just a process. It's not owned by manufacturing. It's not owned by financial institutions or healthcare or business. It's something that's used across the board that just measures how well we're doing, which is something this will do. And if we can come up with the measurement to be able to show. So Sigma is just the lowercase Greek letter for Sigma, and it stands for standard deviation. And so the standard deviation would be 3.4 something per million defects. And it's how close you want to be. You want to be within Six Sigma range. So your perfection would be in the middle. You want to be 3 standard deviations on one side of perfection, 3 standard deviations on the other side, and stay in that tolerance. So if we can find a way to measure ourselves and stay in a tolerance, we will be able to move forward by leaps and bounds and do it with the people that we.
Excellent. Thank you.
Thank you. Anybody else have any comments or questions? No, thank you. This is Director Lipton.
Thank you.
Your presentation. Next on the agenda, we've got recent development plans within the city of Wildwood.
Chair, this is usually just an information item, but if there aren't any questions from the committee members, this would go and I'd be glad to try to address them at this time.
Any questions, comments? No, okay. Well, thank you, guys. We'll move on to the farm matters. Your old business. We've got special events and trail closure requests. Assessment of use of fees, April, October, Director Goodrich.
Thank you again, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair and members of the committee, as is described in the memorandum, this particular committee has over the past couple of months discussed potential prohibitions or restrictions on the use of trails by special groups during the high use season. The high use season has been defined for the most part, the weekends during the months of April to October. As many of you are aware, as the trail system has matured, particularly in Merrimack River Valley, we are getting more and more users at all times of the day and all days of the week. And what we're finding as part of the discussions we've had with different organizations, users, and just emails from anonymous sources is that as the trails become more popular and organizations set aside their use and restrict access, there is problems that are arising. And so to address that, the department initially contacted one of the city's partners, the Missouri Department of Natural Resources, specifically Castlewood State Park. The reason for that contact is we share much of the land area and trail system with that entity and ask them what they do. And they do restrict special organizations or organizations from utilizing the trails for single events during the high use season, again, April through October. That was the presentation to the commission to mirror that particular policy so that the two entities that share land and share trails would have the same set of regulations in place and reduce confusion. Committee chose not to pursue that, but did offer an alternative, and that was to add a fee structure for the use of the trails during not only the high use season, but other times of the year. So tonight, the department has finalized that direction and is recommending that during the high use season, a fee of $20 per participant for a special event be assessed and paid to the city. $20 is a large number, but again, here is the assumption that we're trying to preserve the trails for our residents, the visitors that now travel great distances to use the trails, and most importantly, in some regards, is to reduce conflicts on those trails between users that are not aware of a special event, although they may be posted, and users of that system of trails for the special event. And we've had those as well out on the trail system. So we had discussed at our last meeting in April, a fee somewhere ranging between $10 and $15. As you know, as we work through our program budget committee efforts, the intent is to raise revenue. And in this particular instance, I think the desirability of our trails, the atmosphere of our trails and the challenges they present, I think $20 is a fair fee. Would not recommend it if I didn't believe so. On the other times of the year, we would drop to $5 and match what MDNR charges for use of Castlewood State Park and its surrounding lands. So tonight, the department is presenting this particular recommendation for action. And if there are any questions, again, Mr. Patel and I would be glad to address. Thank you.
So just to clarify, you're for the committee to make motion approving that recommendation for council.
Please.
If anybody thinks they want to make that. Second. Second. Councilman. Okay, any discussion on the motion? If none, all in favor of the motion, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Any abstention?
Thank you.
Thank you. Next on the agenda, we've got e-bikes, allowances and restrictions for Wildlands Trail Networks, affecting awards. Director Rubin.
Again, thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair, members of the committee, again, this particular item was discussed at length April meeting. And at that April meeting, the committee had reached, I think, a point where it was ready to proceed forward and adopt basically the regulations as presented. The department, however, did ask or request a postponement to that action to allow it to better integrate concerns that were expressed by our trail police officer and the St. Louis County Police Department Wildwood Precinct. Those concerns focused on the speed of some of the e-bikes that the police see utilized significantly on our trail system. Most of them appear to have a 750 watt electric motor, which I believe equates to about 1 horsepower. but the ability or the speed of those varies greatly. And so from the perspective of the police department, those that are popular, they were concerned that they might be set aside by these regulations. So in the report, the department has identified a couple of changes. First, the general definition of an e-bike now addresses a speed that's 5 miles greater. So 25 miles per hour versus 20 miles per hour. Along with that, it does though set the speed on the trail at 20 miles per hour versus 15 as originally identified, unless posted otherwise. The rationale here is again to address those e-bikes that meet the defined size of the electric motor and the horsepower component, but are capable of going at a greater rate of speed. And those seem to be the most popular. From the standpoint of the department, they're setting the bar for the determination if an e-bike is allowed or not, based upon those popular models and industry standard. But we're saying on our trail system, 20 miles per hour is still the maximum. So what this entails is those users of the larger, let's say, faster e-bikes can be on the trails, but they must maintain a trail speed of no greater than 20 miles per hour. That's 5 miles an hour greater than St. Louis County's policy, that the department believes in this particular instance to ensure that we don't necessarily set aside groups that we want to be on our trails utilizing the bikes. A little additional accommodation is appropriate. So tonight, the changes that have been introduced based upon the police department's input are highlighted in the blue bolded font. And they're for your consideration tonight, along with the others, regulations that have not changed. Therefore, Mr. Chair, the department would respectfully request a motion and direction on this particular item as it is presented tonight. As with the other items, Ms. Ripito and I are available for comments or questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Would anyone like to make a motion? Okay. Go ahead, Councilman.
Yeah, the moving from 15 to 20 feels like a step in the wrong direction to me. What we're trying to accommodate is, you mentioned older folks and other people that have an e-bike just to get around. And I was of the opinion that they can just, get around more slowly to a closer in section. Right. And there's been a reason to increase the speed. We have shared use trails and horses. I had with this horses trotted about 80 forward. So we're talking about and people go considerably faster than they put on a horse to enjoy nature and our national parks. But the speed is in my view, it creates a hazard for hikers and so on and so forth on the trails. And if we want to share them, that's fine, but nobody needs to go 20 miles. I don't think they even really need to go 15, but I would be hesitant to make the speed limit 20. Because it doesn't matter how many, if it's a 750 watt motor, it'll go 25, go downhill, it's going to go 30 or more. And if it's pedal assisted, it's going to go faster than that. And I have my newest car will do 175 miles an hour. I can't do that on the road, and I have to limit myself. And ticketing me 55, and their ticket if I'm going 80 out. Over 6 years. So there's a pledge saying there could be free, and people out hiking should take precedence over people on e-bikes. It's a really thing. 15 miles per hour in that, considering those circumstances, seems faster to me. And so I would like to have a much clearer understanding of why you think 20 is okay, even though 15 is regulated in the county all.
Well, again, it's an accommodation based upon input from the police department that these particular e-bikes, which are the most popular and seen most on the trail network in the city of Wildwood, have the capability to go at a higher rate of speed. By regulating them under the general definition and then placing a 15 mile per hour speed limit on the trail sections as a general rule for them. Their opinion, based upon the email that was provided, seems to indicate that that may preclude the most popular e-bikes. Again, the department doesn't necessarily want to achieve that outcome. What I will tell you is my concerns echo your statements. And that's why, as part of this, I put unless posted at a lower rate for safety considerations associated with that locations. So from the department's perspective, there's probably certain segments of the trail where 20 miles per hour with the appropriate caution could be accommodated. But in situations like Bluffview Park, I just do not see a 20 mile per hour speed being appropriate when it's shared by hikers and equestrian. So I think the outcome would be that we would post certain parks for a lesser speed limit, because of the conditions.
We're looking for flexibility, and citywide, there might be places. If the alternative is maybe four, or you can try to set 8, but suddenly you can get on your e-bike at 1. So I don't see this as a good thing, unless maybe we're talking about including the paved sections of trail like that. Is that so? Bicycles are legal vehicles, let's just be honest. We're suggesting that we can what are essentially sidewalks, which is counter to Missouri state law. And so people can go faster on the sidewalks than they can as legal vehicle. That doesn't make any sense.
Well, just remember that our system of trails, primarily those that are 8 to 10 feet in width, were identified and funded as multiple use trails for a range of users, whether it be a walker, hiker, a jogger, a runner, a rollerblader, or a bicyclist. So under the design, that whole range of users are accommodated on it, and it would not be a violation. You're correct. A true sidewalk, a pedestrian sidewalk, as we define them here, those 4 to 5 foot wide concrete areas, bicycles are not to be on them.
Okay, so they're given class of
Yes.
paving. Even though it's the only sidewalk along the road, a given road, it's still not considered a sidewalk.
It's not, because again, for example, the trails network, so the trail segments along Route 100, Route 109 were generally funded through federal dollars. And we made them multiple use types so that we could basically say that for the purposes of use beyond recreation, they could be for commuting purposes. Because we were trying to check those boxes.
These old folks that are probably retired and need to ride an e-bike, if they can't ride a bicycle, they're going to be commuting somewhere.
Now, I'm suggesting that to get the federal dollars to build the trail, we had to basically expand the definition of their use to be inclusive of not only recreational activities, but also a benefit to the basically traffic mitigation. And in that case, it was bicycles as commuting vehicles for workers.
So we can solve this by buying and posting signage that limits speeds in all but those instances where we think it's appropriate. And then
That's the option that's before you tonight. Again,
that's
generally a stop sign, I believe, was about $30. And we would use appropriately sized signs for the speed limit. They're generally smaller in size And we post them at the trailheads and entries into the trail system, not throughout the trail system. I guess what I would liken it to is you drive east on Route 100 out of Wildwood into Ellison, you climb that hill by the self-storage and the county's maintenance garage. There's a sign there that says 40 miles an hour unless, and then there's a catch-all, speed limits are 25 unless posted differently. And that's kind of the direction I think I was trying to head here. We define the e-bike at 25 miles per hour as a maximum, but we limit it to 20 miles per hour on our trail system unless posted otherwise. I prefer the county policy, but again, I have concerns that our police department, which is out on the trails more than I am these days, identified that we may eliminate a group of potential current users by the definition associated or the definitions associated with e-bikes.
Well, it's the definition is separate from this. People don't want to hear you. I think that's the setting of speed for any e-bike 15 miles an hour has nothing to do with the horsepower generated by any. It's 1,500 watts. If you're even at 15, it doesn't matter. So VA, it's limited, and so I guess I would see the.
Maybe I didn't explain it very well, but let me try one more time. By increasing the allowance for the overall e-bike definition, what we're doing is potentially increasing the speeds. So I think there was an acknowledgement on the department's part that if we're going to increase the e-bike definition to allow up to 25 miles per hour, to set it at 15, what we're probably doing is acknowledging that we're going to have a lot of people not following the rule or the regulations. Yeah.
But
So from that perspective, the committee would like to amend it to a 15 mile per hour maximum speed. That certainly is an option for you all.
Yeah, I wish. Whether you're driving a Ferrari or Volkswagen, regardless the maximum speed of the car, right? The posted speed limit, things where keep your foot on the gas at a certain amount, but if somebody's gonna speed at 15, they're certainly probably speed at 20. My question, first question I had is, are we getting complaints from hikers and people on these trails that bikers are driving at excessive speed? One, two, if we expand the definition of a bike, electric bike, to allow it to be a bike and go up to 25, I guess saying that they can only go 15 on the trail doesn't preclude them from driving 20 in other areas that friends trails. I think we're just specifically talking about trails, and so if they want to go on the trails, I would advocate that this is the next speed. Councilmember Burks.
Yeah, I guess I share a concern too with the 20 mile speed limit. I'm on the trails probably about 3 or 4 days a week on my bike. And I can tell you that when you're on the trails, I see very, very few e-bikes out there right now. And when I'm on my bike and I'm coming up behind somebody who's got their headphones on, and we've got a dog on a leash and is walking back and forth across the trail, I think the last thing you want is somebody coming up behind on an e-bike going 20 miles an hour. And the e-bike tends to be much heavier than bicycles that I typically ride. So the potential impact for somebody on the e-bike is much more dangerous than say somebody on a bicycle. I always make it a point to slow down when I'm coming up and someone, because even if you yell out, on your left, they may or may not hear you if they're lost in thought, or if they've got their headphones on, or if they're talking to somebody that they're walking with. So I guess that was going to be the next question that Councilman Galani or Chair Galani alluded to is, and you mentioned it yourself, Mr. Gaines, can we amend this proposal so that the maximum speed is in fact 15 miles an hour.
Very much so. It would just be a recommendation to approve the regulations as presented with the change to the speed limit from 20 miles per hour to 15 miles.
Would we have to first make a motion to approve the regulations and then offer up an amendment, or how would we do that?
Since there's no motion on the floor at this time, I think the motion can just include the amendment.
Okay,
Would you like to make that motion?
I would like to make a motion that we approve these regulations with a maximum speed limit of 15 miles an hour.
Second?
Oh, I'm sorry, what we need is.
Yeah, we get a second. Second. Discussion.
The. I don't. think that we would like to- It's amended to the. With the whole thing, okay, so I can make it comment. I'm just concerned about what are we gonna put behind that here? Because people coming up with their e-bike, what's it gonna say? Is it gonna say e-bike only? I mean, some people might see, and granted, I haven't seen any moped. But, if you're on some kind of a gasoline powered bike, motor, and you see other people going on the trail with the e-bikes, is that gonna allow something to take gasoline motorized vehicle onto that? And is there gonna be some signage that indicates?
The intent, obviously, of the definition, is to ensure that there's a clarity to adopt what an e-bike is. By our city attorney, reviewed the motor vehicle definition and then provided comments on the definition of e-bike. So in your circumstance, a scooter, a moped would not be an e-bike. And so from that perspective, would not be authorized on the trail.
Yeah.
Well, that's clear on paper, but I'm saying, how are the somebody just coming by and seeing that, seeing somebody going the trail, is there gonna be some kind of signage at the fair that says what the definition?
Number of our trails have just simple signage that says no motor vehicles. Install the bollards, but next to the bollards, we define no motor vehicles, and obviously that relates back to what I just described. In terms of signage, I'm not quite ready to give you an answer how all of this is to be signed as we move into e-bikes and the work that Gork's doing with the mountain bikers. There's just a lot of things that we're kind of talking about right now with the state, just in terms of consistent signage, in terms of sanctioned trails versus social trails, e-bikes, where or not, et cetera. So that's probably going to be a discussion at a meeting here in the near term. Right now, I would say is we're attempting to address the e-bike concept now. How we sign our trailheads and trails relative to the users is something that's going to take a little more thought than I practically addressed.
That's another.
Follow to Councilman Park's question. I think there would be some differentiation, right, with the e-bike being electric powered vehicle versus second powered vehicle, that most like that is certainly which would have some type of internal combustion.
That's exactly it. Because our definition of e-bike speaks to an electric motor at no more than 750 watts.
And I have seen paper. Back in the book. Approximately 1 horsepower, 751. And, but. can we, if we approve this now, we won't be having any e-bikes on there until we've got the signage taken care of, right? So we know what we're gonna put up and have signage out there. It's not like we put this and then it goes to council, it's approved, and oh, we're gonna work on the signage, right?
There's e-bikes on the trails now.
Yeah.
So what we're trying to do, at least in terms of this set of regulations, is to catch up what's already happening out there. From the standpoint of signage, again, we do have signage at some of our trailheads, obviously, that explains the trail etiquette and et cetera. And that's part of the regulations that operators of e-bikes must adhere to the trail etiquette. Things like Mr. Odenberg just mentioned, when you pass somebody, make sure they understand what side you're on and you're passing them so that you avoid conflicts. But yes, I don't know if the regulation of something that's already on the trail could be delayed for a discussion on signage. That's just my.
So that,
And just some.
on the floor is to approve the recommendation from the department with the change from the 20 per hour maximum to 50 miles per hour maximum per hour. Yeah, and that's what we're having the second motion. So we've got a second. So any further discussion on the matter?
Two questions. An electric scooter. See, it's, when are they considered an electric bike? Are they allowed in the trail system?
Currently, we allow them on the trail system. How they fit with our definition, have to do a little more research on that.
Just curious. Second question. What's the ticket when you're speeding? Into this ordinance? I'm sure the police would do the break. What would be the fine for somebody to decide that they're at 25?
Believe it's the same as a traffic moving violation if it were a street or otherwise.
I think when you do the signing, it'd be important to even if you do the QR codes, let people know that there is a fine associated with it. See that.
Maybe one of those machines.
You're traveling at this speed. Thank you.
Any further discussion on the matter? All in favor of the motion? Any opposed? Abstention.
Thank you.
Thank you, Director Lynch. Next on the agenda is winterizing the restrooms at Green Park. And Ward 5, and Ms. Renzo.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and members of the committee. As previously discussed at the April meeting, due to increasing popularity, the department received requests to upgrade the restroom facility at the Green Pines Park so that the restroom could be used year round. Per the committee's direction, the department sought a bid for the restrooms and contacted the contractor that did the initial work on the park and requested a bid to add heating to the restroom. The proposal received was $7,987.50, which included heating the equipment room only where the water pipes are located. So the pipes wouldn't actually freeze, but it was not actually heating the whole restroom. So still be a little chilly in there. The bid proposal was considered at the April meeting. The committee members noted that the cost was more than expected and requested that the lump sum amount that we were given was separated into individual components. So this evening, that cost breakdown of the bid is attached in your packet for the committee's consideration and review. The department would identify that this amount does include all the steps necessary for the conversion. And tonight, the department is seeking direction from the committee members on this proposal. And if the committee would like to move forward with a favorable recommendation to the city council for final action. And with that, that concludes the department's presentation. But Mr. Brainage and I are here for any questions you may have.
Do you have any questions or comments for the
Yes, somebody in Ward 5, we voted in there, but we did the Ward 5 first, don't care. I'm in Ward 5, I just. This. Price, we keep saying that that money in favor other than. I have been bombarded. But I'm new. 8 grand been a bargain in Porter Park. Same thing, which is next on.
And this is actually, just to what you explained, just to protect the pipes, but the folks that would be utilizing the direction, it's going to decrease.
It would still be chilly, that's for sure.
Yeah, there was quite a bit of discussion about the main eating. Or keeping the restaurant open here, that it's really popular. I don't go there, I'm for say something, make that push, but I would support somebody else. who Cares about it.
What, I guess, what would it cost to put a water potty there? Probably 20 years.
Mr. Delani, we have considered placing a temporary facility at the park. Problem is to place it so it can be accessible for maintenance. Has to be, most part, pretty close to the entry area. And that's exactly where we have 2 homes that are on either side of the entry. And so the thought was, if you want porta potty every time you look out the back of your house, and there it goes to the sea. Then we thought about trying to screen it, but by the time we fit it in there and do the screen so it's accessible, meaning someone in a wheelchair get into the restroom facility to utilize it. We ended up having to take out landscaping, relocate, so it was getting more and more expensive to do a temporary facility, although those costs would be one time. Besides the rental facility, just the screen.
And follow up to that. Just to get the information out there, if there is the $7,800 to heat the place. What would be, how much more would it cost? If you're gonna go to that and the heat the buildings cost. What would be the additional difference to just run ductwork into the actual restrooms? Just, I'm not advocating that it's an expense for the $8,000, but if you're gonna do it, if it was 9,000, it's actually heating restrooms themselves. Yeah.
I don't know, but as we talked at the last meeting in April, we have a little time on this, so if that's something we would like the department to explore. Is that doing this additional step to actually make the restroom facility itself, the interior comfortable, we can certainly.
But if you're gonna do it, you just want to have this for people to actually do it. Sure. Reason that. We're doing water or not doing it all. That's, we don't have any.
This is not a question, so currently they're unlocked, right? The restroom can be unlocked.
They're unlocked during the season. We generally lock them sometime around the end of October, early November when we start.
So then the intent would be they'd have to be like unlocked. going forward. I'm just curious about people who just decide they want to spend the money here. I mean, you see people living in cars, is that not going to be another? Will that happen? Big deal? I don't know.
We've had actually residents in the University Park restaurant times. The police obviously address it on a need basis, but yes, there are certain times that more comfortable you make it and more appealing it is for people that need shelter. That's what Robert.
Just curious, how much demand is there for use of the restrooms during the cold weather season?
It's a consistent call that Chris Hager, our park superintendent, receives. Why are the restrooms locked? That kind of, and we explain that they're just not winterized, and if we don't turn off the water, the pipes open.
But at this time, we don't have a motion to take action on this, so.
I wonder, is it reasonable to ask you to just sit on this for a month and bring it back so Mr. Marshall and maybe some others can look into the demand for this? Because I recall vividly a discussion where there was seemed to be significant demand for it. And it's, I mean, the price is, it's not trivial, but it's not that expensive. I think it's probably. Would anybody want to second that motion?
I think everything.
Okay.
No.
While we're looking into the demand, would you also like us to look into the additional costs to heat actual restaurant?
Yeah, I would think that. Councilman Martian's question, what types of steps for security or, you know, does it make sense to have camera there or something for that purpose? Because I'm sure the residents of those homes are too. Vagrants really like staying.
Other parks that we have, if we do this, will we not be in a position that every other park will do the same thing?
For the most part, the facility at Alphonse Trailhead and accommodated is different type of facility in terms of its construction technique. So obviously, Anniversary Park would be the other candidate. Community Park is already winterized and buildable. I would note that they have all the locks on the restrooms on timers. Folks that have chosen to spend the night there figure out the time frame and they lock. And so it's there before they do it. The system. And then obviously a safety mechanism that people. That's locked. Not necessarily, but.
Councilor Clark.
His motion, it seemed like Rob's motion was different than what we just ended to. So is that a new motion?
My motion was to postpone it for a month so that Mr. Marsh specifically could get a handle on the demand, because I don't think it's quantifiable. Perhaps you can get us some data, and then the addition, which is a sensible move, is to figure out what the additional cost will be to each thing, which I think is maybe just buy a place where John can go without.
So would you like to amend your motion?
Yes, so I'm adding that in this.
Second to it?
While we're, I mean, it's May, so we have quite a bit of time here. And it was saying, I think, but it was fair, one is fair for everybody. So if we're going to get additional costs to the entire restaurant, we should just pay the restaurant. Shouldn't do one of them. So if we can add that to the amended motion, then we would want to, what is the work costing? Play 30K instead of, yeah, 8 or 9. Well, regardless, I think it's only fair to do.
Get the information.
Let's get the end for sure.
Get the
Well,
No, we're gonna look at that. And
you're both
information from here. Councilor.
We can also get information about how many complaints you get, you know, these are, you know, there's none of them. Like different things.
Talk with Kristen, the park superintendent, and see if we can quantify it for you. And since we're asking for additional information on the current bid, we'll try to find another bidder as well.
Yeah. So you're seconding Councilor Randall's motion, whatever it was. We clear on the motion itself, Lynn?
I believe so. It was a motion to postpone it a month in order to look into the demand of the park, the cost to heat the full restroom, and also security, and then also do all of that for Anniversary Park.
Yes.
Okay. Absolutely.
So we got the motion that's been seconded. Any further discussion on the matter? Being none, all in favor of the motion, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Any abstentions? All right, thank you.
Thank you.
We get it. Okay. Next, under new business, we've got the Village Green traffic closure relocation to Mayor's Road. Checking Ward 8, episode. Back to you.
I am going to share my screen here.
Okay. Believe I'm right. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair, members of the committee, as previously discussed, the Village Green project is currently in the engineering design phase for bidding purposes, much of which has been finalized or is near that stage in that development process, including the size and construction character of the grass oval and how to best address the perimeter of walk, as well as placement of SM log cabin, stormwater management plan, parking along Main Street, the relocation of utilities to accommodate both Main Street extension as well as the Village Green site. However, there are two components of the overall scheme that have been identified pertaining to the location of the City Hall's trash enclosure, which is currently located on the southwest portion of the parking lot along the immediate border of the Village Green site, and thus would also be right along the entry of the Village Green. So for aesthetic reasons, as well as practical reasons and accessibility, the design consultant suggested that perhaps having your trash enclosure in the main entrance was not the best location. And so that became the whole issue of where to reposition this trash enclosure. So after several discussions with the consultant team, they recommended locating it over by the existing Mayor's Grove, which you can see on the screen in front of you on the southeast corner of the property. So that it remains usable for access purposes, but doesn't detract from the character of the property. So this change would obviously require the Mayor's Grove to be resituated because you wouldn't want the Mayor's Grove behind our new trash enclosure. So then this became a conversation. Both of these considerations have costs associated with them and certainly considerations relative to the design impact. So to better understand this, the consultant team provided the drawing that you're looking at now. So you can kind of get a concept of where these discussions happened. One of the yellow boxes is the existing location of the trash enclosure, and there were discussions of resituating it so that it wasn't quite in the entryway and also taking up parking, additional parking places. In moving the facility over to where the existing Mayor's Grove, can essentially be summarized in the Mayor's Grove, as part of the Village Green provides greater visibility. Right now, many people aren't aware that it's even there. And so this will actually incorporate it into the Village Green. And more often than not, the existing Mayor's Grove is also blocked by people in parking spaces around the perimeter there. It also would, the Mayor's Grove would complement the SM Log Cabin location, which will also be located in the Village Green. And close to the main event space so that people will be walking by it regularly at events. They'll be able to see our Mayor's Grove. The trash enclosure would replace the area of trees on the east of the back parking lot at City Hall and be oriented and designed to provide ease of access for user pickups. And it would also be screened by existing trees from the community garden. The current design of this enclosure materials would be able to be rethought and create less ominous of a structure that's also easier to maintain and provide upkeep. So at the last collective meeting with the consultants and city's team members, these two items were discussed, and essentially the last decisions that need to be made in order to proceed with completion of the engineering plans that are needed for bid specifications to be advertised. So accordingly, the department would like to proceed with these designs as presented to the committee member at tonight's meeting. These changes have positive benefits for the Village Green site as well as City Hall site. And so acknowledging this, the department seeking the committee's comments and direction in this regard. And with this input and comment, the department can provide feedback to the consultant team for inclusion in the final set of instruction documents that will go out to bid for this project. And with that, that concludes the department's presentation. However, Mr. Vunich and myself are available for any questions you may have.
Sure, so just to clarify, are you guys looking for action regarding moving this forward, just comments regarding?
I believe both.
As first and foremost, if you have any thoughts on the recommended designs, we'd like to hear those. We can incorporate them, but if you are satisfied with the analysis done by the consultant team, we would request a motion.
That's another question. You satisfied. Wait a second. Member Rotella? Okay, any discussion on the motion?
Question about the year's growth. Is that over there? Will there, it looks like it's limited in this space. Will there be space for it to expand with future mayors?
Yeah, that particular location as shown there actually has more room for expansion than the very small area where they're currently located, because there's a pretty steep drop off after that goes down into like the theater parking lot area. There's a pretty steep hill there, and so honestly, this probably has more room for expansion than the area where they're currently located.
Dumpster. That's gonna take that, the trucks across that loop. Every time we come through, is that gonna increase the need for repairs up the road, the new road there?
I would defer to Mr. Vunich, but it's my understanding that they use, the loop anyway in order, when pulling in, pulling out and for trash service. So.
Original design of City Hall is considered actually required the trash enclosure not to face down the access lane. So the first thing you would see as you enter the south parking lot are the gates. And as you know, sometimes the gates don't close because the dumpsters aren't pushed far enough back and they're empty. And so the thought was, that's just not a very good look as you drive into City Hall. So what you see is the side of the enclosure. So as Mr. Rippleto said, to make the pickup into this particular instance, as we did over at the existing facility, we used the heavy duty concrete so as it can accommodate the movements of the truck and jerking that occurs when that was undertaken.
Okay, any further discussion? That's what we're having.
Couple questions. Do you have an elevation, suggested elevation for this? You said you're gonna make it more aesthetically pleasing or whatever the words were. Do we have some idea what it's gonna look like, or is that later in the process?
We have not determined what the trash enclosure, like what it would be built out of thus far.
So do we have is that the only dumpster for all of City Hall 4-1 and 4-2?
Yes.
Have we considered the place something down on floor 1? Kind of, I know we have those bottle recycling bins down there. I don't think it would be any further of a hike. I'm just wondering if we had, kind of thought about that, or is that just to kind of hide it down?
If you look at the image that's on the screen, you can actually see another little yellow square that is down, and that's actually by the police department on the first floor. The issue,
The stairway, but
well, it's one, it gets in the way of the police department's Sally Port from there. Yeah, it was difficult to figure out. Yeah.
I just checked out the marriage. And one tree is completely dead. 2 trees are gonna die this year. And the only 2 healthy ones are Mr. Marshall's red maple and a red oak of someone else whose name escapes me. But they can both stay. So it's not gonna cost us anything. If we give up any trees, we're just gonna have to put in new ones that live better. All we need to do is pick up the money and some move multiply it. So this is a great cost effective way to do it, and so a lot of benefits. So this is a well thought out proposal.
It does seem like an excellent time to move the mayor's road, doesn't it?
Mr. Chair.
Sure.
Councilmember Randall's coming. I don't know if you visited our trash enclosure. It is quite a beast. Even the doors that cover the trash enclosure entries, they're as heavy as can be and they're hard to maneuver. They break quite a bit because they are so heavy. I think this is a great opportunity to do something better with our trash enclosure, to make it more stylish looking and less intrusive and easier for people to access. So I think it's a win-win.
Great, okay, well, then we'll just go ahead and take a vote. Motion, all in favor of the motion to approve the design is submitted back to forward, say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Any abstention? Okay, thank you very much. Which brings us to our next item on the new business, and the Porter's Park, and single family dwelling in the current condition effective 6. Director Budish.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair, members of the committee, obviously this is a topic that's difficult to present because we have a major problem with the single family dwelling. As is described in the memorandum, before the city took ownership of the generous gift from Ms. Yost at Pertner Park, there was a number of steps of due diligence accomplished by the city. One of those was a mold inspection, and at that time, mold was discovered in the home. It was problematic and was in almost every room of the house as well as the basement. But mold solutions believed it could be remediated. After that mold inspection, the city was proceeding forward with the acceptance of the donation, but there was an issue raised by one of Ms. Yost's family members regarding the donation. And there was quite a bit of time that was spent addressing that concern of that family member and ultimately the donation to the city. During that period of time, a water leak occurred in the basement of the home. The water leak, we're not sure how long it lasted, but ultimately was discovered by the city on a visit to the property and was stopped. The area was cleaned as best as possible, but obviously the water leak was there. We didn't take possession of it for another number of months. Ultimately, the mold condition became worse. Acknowledging that, we began the process of trying to find a firm to remediate, which is why you see in our request for proposals as part of the packet. That request for proposals was submitted for consideration by our leadership here at the city and ultimately was approved, but there was a delay associated with that. It just so happened that a gentleman from American Environmental Laboratories was in City Hall checking the mold situation here. It's okay, you're not. And the department requested that he do the testing out of home in Pertner Park. As you can see from his report, situation is fairly dire. And so tonight the department is presenting 3 options to proceed forward with the request for proposals and seek remediation of the dwelling so it can be retained and used. To seek bids for the demolition of the dwelling, given its current condition. Or third, seek another opinion relative to the mold situation in the home. The department certainly does apologize for the circumstance. We did visit the property regularly. That was the responsibility of our superintendent and our code inspectors. They acknowledged that the mold situation was certainly there, doing our best to mitigate it through a process of engaging a consultant that could basically accomplish the remediation of mold, which just became worse faster than I think anyone expected. And so tonight, there's an apology as part of this memorandum that we will do our best to address the direction the committee provides regarding the matter. Thank you.
We have a question. Councilman Park.
Yeah, maybe I just missed it, but I looked at the a couple of times and I can't find what type of mold we found. Because that would greatly influence me one way or another about this decision. If it's a black mold, it would be pathogenic. If it's really three categories of mold. And if it's allergenic, we could come in. It's pathogen, but toxigenic would be something different. But so I would have to go with the getting a second opinion and getting some detailed analysis of what is this mold that we're talking.
Yeah, but that's the scheme of this game. It's a tragedy because they shut the well off and there's a 60-gallon pressure tank likely in the basement. The very first cold froze and they drained from the bottom. So all 60 gallons of basement sat there for several years, and that this all could have been prevented. So it's a shame. My questions to you are practical. I have photos of the first home on that property from the 1860s. I have a second one that lasted until the 1960s probably. And so this one doesn't mean anything from a historical perspective, but it's part of the bequest. And I was of the opinion that we could either rent it, offer it as a perk to a city employee or something like that. But it's in the way, the park property. And so my question is, first question is what are the legal ramifications of getting a bid to raise this structure now that we've taken the bequest? Will we be exposing ourselves to?
I haven't asked City Attorney Young that specific question regarding the dwelling. But as you know, there are a number of outbuildings that are on the property as well. And several of those are in very dire conditions, not so much from mold, just because they're falling apart. And my question to City Attorney Young was, can we remove them? And he said, certainly, under the safety concerns associated with having them in a public park, you can. And so I will verify as we move forward with this particular topic with the city attorney.
So there's a chicken coop directly behind the home. There are a couple of small that said many times. That's where my family was busted for having we gave today still and 40,000 gallons of sour mash. And I have the part. And that was when my grandfather was a constable during Prohibition. And so it's historic, it's literally historic. And there are very few banks. So that should be worthy of observation if the rest are gone. So I would hate to just decide, okay, we're going to down.
No,
And it probably is sort I probably listed this as
in no such circumstances, the department recommending such. As you know, I think the goal from the perspective of the department is eventually begin a public outreach program effort relative to Partner Park and see what we can do, see what people would like to basically have at the facility, and certainly do that historical inventory and survey and do it with obviously a great deal of careful consideration. Because yes, I think the city is not obligated, but certainly should respect the structures their history as part of that particular property in the overall area, the community. But in this particular instance, the department's not ready to make any decisions relative to any of the other outbuildings. It's just, we have this situation. The mold isn't going to get better, so we have to make some decisions, I think, sooner than later, so we can restart the process of knowing what we can or can't do, and the cost of those options.
So the remediation option that was presented was a couple years old and it was shockingly low. I would be surprised if we could get it done for 4 times that amount. This is a gut renovation. And what do we do with the property? And so I would be inclined myself to say if it's legally copacetic for us to just raise the structure, I would reluctantly say, maybe we should do that. We can still use the well instead of this. This is a nice little home, but not if you have to do that we have necessarily, because the city's not in the business of being land. Maybe that I may be in the minority saying that here, but I don't know that I just through research I seldom do, but I don't know that we need any information that black nasty mold. And it would be hard for them to assess without ripping off the drywalls in the upper story, the insulation behind it and see what type of mold is there. The photos told me a pretty powerful story of what kind of this is actually to be. And I don't spend any money unless it was a free service for people for them to do that.
Director, the Councilmember Randall's point was that we're during the stage of the bid for the remediation. I guess if we're looking for a motion to take action on one of those 3 options, I think it would make sense that the committee would have the accurate cost, because it kind of it's really not relevant to make a decision based on remediation.
Yeah.
When it could be 40 or 50,000.
Rationale for providing you original report from Mold Solutions was just to define the fact that there was a mold problem before we accepted the property as the donation.
Then we know what the cost would be to raise the property.
No, and again, what I was hoping to find is at least some direction. Do you want additional bids for the remediation? Do you want bids for the remediation? Do you want bids for the demolition? Do you want a second opinion just on the analysis? You could, in my opinion, ask for bids for remediation and ask for bids for the demolition and see,
Yes.
and do the comparison.
After
We get them ready. When I'm reading something, even at $50,000, you don't want to be, next year it's 25,000, and then next year, I mean, it's just, it can never end also. Yeah, but I would, I'll make that, we just get all the information on all of it.
So the seconded by Councilor Flasher. Any discussion of the motion?
I guess I still think that we should know what kind of mold it's in, so that we go forward, as we know what we're working with. So, and it all is dictated some scraping and to look at it, so we're gonna know. Black mold has, there are other molds that do, in appearance wise, look like black mold.
Yes, get that bid for remediation. Can we have them specify the types of mold?
Actually, I was going to call American Environmental Laboratories and just ask for that analysis. I think they've done the sampling already. I had a conversation with Jeff Miller, the lab manager, and there is black mold. But I can certainly just ask what types, just get some explanation for it. So that would, regardless of the motion, I was going to do that anyway. And I don't think they were in order of priority. The lab manager said he spent as least amount of time in there as he could because he was somewhat surprised by the condition.
Well, I think, so we got a motion and seconded to provide those updated bids regarding demolition and notification. You're also gonna get the specification of the types and dangers of what's there and that. And so seeing no further discussion there, all in favor of the motion as presented, say aye. Aye. Any opposed? And any abstentions? Okay, thank you.
And just one side comment. Councilmember Rambo hit the nail on the head. It was the pressure tank associated with the well, they burst. It was a stream that was shooting probably 20 feet out from it at the time I arrived to address it.
Well, we'll have to figure out how to handle it at this point. So thank you very much for that presentation and questions. Through everything. So that brings us next on the agenda to the hardcourt area at Town Center, which is Pete. Director Lewis.
Thank you again, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair and members of the committee, as you know, there's been an ongoing discussion at City Council about our hardcourt facility in Community Park. With the development of the mixed-use project in Town Center, it including 2 pickleball courts, there was a desire on the part of City Council to see if a partnership could be developed with that particular property owner and add pickleball courts or additional hardcourt surfaces at that location. The department did have that conversation with Mr. Cohn, and certainly as he alluded at the City Council meeting this May, he is open to such a partnership. To help that discussion kind of proceed forward, the department requested that our park designer of the facility in Community Park overlay, for the most part, what we were proposing there on this particular site. And so it does not, for the most part, acknowledge that we could do less facilities. It was just an attempt to kind of compare the apple in Community Park to the apple in Town Center. There's certainly a lot of ways to make this kind of work from the perspective of additional facility. But as you can see, it does impact a certain area of the parking lot, the water detention basin, and for the most part, fortunately does not require us to go into the wooded section of the property and the tributary that drains through. So from the perspective of the department, with some refinements, we could do, for the most part, what we have proposed in Community Park. Facility more, I guess, comprehensive in terms of the opportunities, not only pickleball, but tennis and half-court basketball, and still provide parking on the site, a relatively good number of spaces on the site, and address, I think, water detention through some, I think, a little bit more creative engineering. So tonight we're presenting it to you for comment.
Sorry, I was looking at it.
No, you're right. So the biggest reason I was open to this whole thing when it first got presented was it's got the potential to bring more business to Town Center, which was a plus. And then I thought that there was a potential that it could be less expensive because we started with the $200,000 budget at one point, and then we got all the way up to 400. And though I'm open to whatever it's going to take personally, within reason, it would be nice to get closer to the original budget if possible. Do we know if this would help cost-wise at all? I didn't see that in the report. Maybe I missed it.
From the department's perspective, it's going to reduce the city's cost because regardless, the developer is responsible to prepare the site for 2 pickleball courts and parking and the detention basin. So the mobilization, the grading, And much of the stormwater management facilities are all a component of the development, not necessarily this hardcore area. So from the perspective of the department, I don't know if it's a magnitude of 50% of the cost is reduced. And I'm not quite there yet, but there will be a cost savings to the city.
And you think that's significant savings potentially?
I think so, yes.
Okay. I mean, with that in mind, I don't know what we're looking for as far as.
Well, if there's an endorsement on the part of the committee that let's try this apple to apple
Yeah.
comparison, then that's what I'll present to Mr.
We
Cohen.
got to go to timeline, because we've been dependent on this change the dramatically as well as far as we could get going on this thing.
I don't believe so. Obviously, from Mr. Cohen's perspective, this was the last component added to his overall plan. It wasn't where we started and then, oh, I think I'll do a multiple family with the pickleball courts. That kind
Yeah.
of situation. I'm not trying to be.
No, I get it.
But and what I would suggest is that I think the ordinance that's before city council can accommodate this, because we always talk in minimums and maximums. In this case, it was a minimum of 2 pickleball courts on this location. I know there are concerns about parking among city council members, but I think what we're seeing in terms of a reduction is not substantial. We're still able to park some of the pickleball use here, the hard court use here. So I'm thinking that there's probably some engineering that'll be the responsibility of the city, just to kind of ensure it works. And then I just don't see it slowing the project down.
Under the assumption this is going to save cost wise, I'd like to. I think it's desirable to have it in town center.
So your motion is for recommendation to move forward instead of just. Yeah. And we second the motion? Yes. Right.
So, I mean, the one thing that the discussion with Mr. Cohen to be is, since this is, I mean, we're at publicly looking towards this, he made a comment that his resident at first priority, I want to make sure that that is not necessarily the case. That, you know, we're using public money, the public should have as much access to it as the residents.
We'll certainly discuss that issue with him, and I think there's ways to accommodate a fair use.
Yeah, I love it. I think it offers a greater amenity to the folks moving into that facility, even if they don't necessarily have first dibs on the pickleball courts. And even better, it lets us do some restriping and have another tennis court or another half court basketball, and just kind of ensure against pickleball falling off the table. So it's just the concern that I would ask you to address in your further work is the aesthetics. It could look great, and it could be, that's kind of a self-contained facility, the way I see it. You pull in, you park, and the whole thing could be enclosed with some kind of nice fencing or something like that. But I would like to understand what it's going to look like before we decide to put something that might be on site.
Key components of aesthetics is the fencing associated with the court system, and we're at its height, it's going to have to meet the setbacks. That's why it's kind of off Taylor Road. Now, the setbacks aren't substantial. They're 0 to 25 feet, so we have some flexibility. There were already concerns voiced by city council about just the fact that we have that detention basin right next to the edge of Taylor Road right of way. So there were some aesthetic makeovers that were already programmed. But I also want to compliment the committee. As you recall, when we went through this process over in Community Park, the 4 pickleball courts basically is a tennis court. So if pickleball does kind of fall out of favor, It can be easily converted to another tennis court or a full court basketball arena.
Yeah, I got a question. With Mr. Cohn still planning to put, like, wasn't he originally thinking about putting his own pickleball courts in? And then we were like, oh, how about we add this to it too? So would this just replace his idea of any pickleball courts, or would this be in addition to his pickleball courts? The reason I ask is the Don's question. If he had his own pickleball courts as well as our little facility, he could reserve his pickleball courts for the resident. This could be the public pickleball courts. It just happened to be right next to his.
This was the only location of proposed pickleball courts. So we'll be changing his proposal by our partnership. But I still think there's a way to make it work.
Yeah.
Okay.
Long-term maintenance, I mean, he would have to do maintenance if he had his two there. The city's gonna end up with a much larger thing, maybe part of the concession to get him to start that even earlier, maybe something down for the long maintenance, because he would have to take care of his. Where I think if the city's got the largest majority of it, maybe that might entice him to a little bit better. So,
Good suggestion.
Let's go to Clark. I agree as well. I think it's just. This will probably some. So. It's more traction for more citizens to pass by on a regular basis. So. All right, so we've got the motions. Without any further discussion, all in favor of the motion, please say aye. Any opposed? Any abstentions? Thank you very much. And, that takes us to the Pond Elementary Little Free Library proposal.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. If I may, I would like to present from over here so that I can go through my screen share. Thank you. Mr. Chair, members of the committee, if you're not familiar with Little Free Library, it is essentially generally a wooden structure. They come in different shapes and sizes, but people bring books and take books, and it's all free of charge. It's just a way of sharing books. Thus far, the city has only authorized one such structure that was originally placed in Community Garden, down when the Community Garden was down the street closer to Taylor, and it has since been moved to City Hall. You can see it in this photograph here. It was sponsored by the Eureka High School as part of a class project that had an impact on literacy in its neighborhood. Thereafter, there seemed to be a bit of a fad with these little libraries, and there were several inquiries and or requests that had come into the city, which led the decision of the Planning and Parks Committee to create a policy for these structures that because there was a need for consistency and maintenance of the structures and kind of guarantee that they would be taken care of. This was approved by the City Council in 2017. This particular request is by Pond Elementary students. They would like to donate a Little Free Library to install in Community Park as a service project for one of their classes. This image that you see here is the actual structure that they are proposing. It was apparently constructed by a construction company and has shingles on the roof to help prevent weather-related deterioration. The school has also agreed that it would be sealed after painting and that it would be repainted and or resealed as necessary. The representatives also understand that the city has the right to govern its colors and design components along with potential removal if it's not maintained. However, they did request that the kids be able to create a design to paint on the library, but they were waiting for approval from the city before they did that. The department has provided in the packet an aerial of Community Park, which you can see here with some potential locations. And as you can see, they're surrounding the large pavilion there. And some of them are right next to benches so that people could sit and actually go through the books or read a book to their child. There's also a couple close to the pavilion. The goal here was to keep it keep the little library visible so that people would know that it's there and would actually utilize it, and books would come and go in and out of it. But also have it accessible from our walking paths so that people could actually get to them. And I have photographs of these areas here. You can see one has a bench over here, and it'd be really easy to locate the Free Little Library there. There's another visual of the same bench, and then also in front of the large pavilion. The next one, if you see on the bottom photograph, that's a bench that's further over in the park area. The only requirement is that they have grass, because they actually have to put in a concrete base in order to install the library. And so it has to be in grass. And so that's the only real requirement. So given the sponsor is aware of the city's policy regarding these little free libraries, and they're willing to meet all of the requirements, and this would be a benefit to the community, the department is seeking support of this application and the committee's guidance in regards to the particular location, if there's some place that you're definitely opposed to, as well as allowing the students to paint the Free Little Library, and or if we should put restrictions or something along those lines. So if the committee approves this proposal, the department would work with the sponsor to determine the appropriate location for the Free Little Library. And once it's designed and the location is chosen, the structure would be installed by a contractor hired by the city, which is a requirement of ours, but it would be maintained thereafter by the sponsor. And they have agreed to replenish it with books and even have a book fair in order to ensure that it is filled all the time. And with that, that concludes the department's presentation, but Mr. Vunich or I are available for any questions you may have. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much for the
Sure.
I love it. I love it. I think they should have pretty much free reign, however curiously they must be. First, if there can be any relationship to any of these locations with the book trail that we have there. The story trail, or if one of these is more favorable than the others, these books.
If I recall correctly, the book trail actually starts over more by the dog park. And so it's not actually in the area by the pavilion that they were requesting it. Yeah, I mean, it would, if we put it in the right location, it could be visible from across the parking lot by the dog park, but it wouldn't necessarily be within proximity to any of the pages of the book throughout the book walk.
Is if we would ensure that they guessed at the doors. Then weather blowing in sideways and then instead rain, a little latch. They need to ensure that there's no water, strong wind. Be much after if they have contractor build. But other than that, we'll go on. Getting 6 of them.
Let's see what.
But have we had any type of vandalism in the parks? I haven't, because just recently in Ward 1, we had some vandalism, some road sign. Is that the norm?
I would defer to Mr. Vunich for confirmation. However, it's been my experience when it comes to these little libraries, there doesn't tend to be a whole lot of vandalism. They're all over various different cities. Some people have them in their front yard. And I think that there's something that's just enjoyed or or at least respected enough by kids that they don't tend to get destroyed.
Just to keep the student excited. Not that it's done. In those, in the humidor, they have those, dehumidifiers, so they stick in something like that to keep the humidity down inside of the.
Actually, comment and kind of goes along the line of this and some of the other things we've talked about this evening, fully supportive of the book, the library, regarding like community park, anniversary park, and potentially Bluffview park. Has the city considered or looked at, given the current, technology and camera system at the park locations to where, and obviously we haven't had any major occurrence, obviously, but especially on a community park, it goes down to the kind of the bottoms area. Just as a preemptive measure, I know these days doors are much less costly than, but as a preventative measure or deterrent for anybody who might be looking to cause in general to the facilities for the rec rooms there, obviously for any type of pieces that can take place, and just so it's a deterrent up front, or in the event that something did take place, the police will be able to have that type of.
Those county police department and the department of administration are installing this camera action in the park. It was part of the original bid for City Hall parking garage. It was removed after discussions with the Board of Public Safety regarding just cost concerns. And so we didn't do it. We are now going to do it. Money available through the police department that is going to cover, I think, the lion's share of cost. Problem we face at Lucky Park is internet access. And power. We're not aware we don't like that park. So there's no electricity.
We have like anniversary park.
Anniversary could certainly.
And what was it, just for, if you have this number, you know it, like the cost for the one in community park, that's good.
Time, it was somewhere around $15,000. Because we had to do, we don't have internet there, and I wanted to basically connect it to the system here at the police department. Obviously, there's other options. You just have a disc in the camera. Or download basically get a disc and download. We can certainly investigate it. Fortunately, knock on wood, haven't had a lot of vandalism. And what we have primarily is on the trail system. It's just graffiti on the walls. Buttons, almost things like that.
I was just bringing it up for safety purposes, long-term, for better measures, of course. If something happened, we have some type of.
Community park is scheduled, certainly anniversary park. But like I said, those parks along the Merrimack River Valley. We just don't have a lot of the utilities serving, right?
Thank you very much for that explanation, Councilman Marshall.
I think from a location standpoint, I'd be there with wherever the department thinks, but I kind of think you put it over towards the playground, towards the big pavilion. A lot more people would see it there than walking. I think the trail's nice thing, but I think if they see it there, people thinking their kids there might get a lot more exposure to what's at the place there. So
Yeah, the thought was is that as part of the storybook walk. At the start, at page 1, we would put, you like this book, there's a lot more very lively.
Awesome. Very good. Awesome. Well, we got the motion on the floor. Discussion. All in favor of the motion, please say aye. Any opposed? Any- Last couple items here. under the new business, in-person and virtual recreational programs. Would you like me to do these together, Director Lynch, and then facility reservations, event registrations? For the cost per person.
Again, Ms. Ripatola and I are here to answer any questions regarding the two items, the more informational. And standing at the podium and delaying the close of the meeting, just to draw your attention to the expenditure. On page 3, bottom. I thought it appropriate to do cost comparison with our new contracting services. And so what you see is a table that basically provides 2022, 2023. The amount of change, 2022 was going daily, 2023 is now.
And then the last section, not ready for action. Does anybody have any questions or comments regarding any of the items? Seeing none, our next meeting is Tuesday, June 20th, 2023. And with that, does anybody have? Sure, go ahead.
So I mentioned before, I'm thinking, adding public work. And facility update, but Mr. Ronish and I had talked about, in the possibly adding, in maybe next year, construction of a blind accessible trail at the north area of Community Park, and maybe we could put that on for future, an agenda for future things. Because I think that would be very beneficial to pushing up our residents that can enjoy the nature and apply to continue for next week. And if we had group that pointed out a perfect place, I think it would be rather relatively.
Yeah, I think that's a great idea. Does that require any type of action in order to have a future agenda?
Mr. Chair, we were just planning to do that as part of our discussion of fiscal year 2024 budget. We could just go on real quick. Then we did a nice little route that kind of goes to the northernmost part of the park and comes back down by the two pavilions. It's flat. It's a great setting. There's a lot of cedars there, so they for the sense it's a great place to be, just to smell the cedars and things like that. So that immediately came to mind on this part, and we're talking about possible vacation.
Thank you very much. Anybody else, Miss Ladies? All right, that brings us to closing. And just in closing, I would like to thank everybody for their faith and trust in putting me in this chair. Thank you, Councilmember Bartoni, for your confidence and suggestion. Had a pleasure here. We finished 5 minutes past the 8:30 deadline, so that's a good start. And we'll try to do better next time. And to walk in God's footsteps, you need attention to knowledge. So thank you again, and appreciate it. And thank you for the meeting. It's really been such a great group. So with that, I would entertain a motion. Flasher, all those in favor say aye.